The ending of Mass Effect 3 has a bit of infamy in the gaming community. If you were around at the time of the game's release, it was all anyone really talked about after launch. Articles were everywhere about how the ending was just a color swap and a choice-based RPG that sold itself on the promise that your actions mattered. It was a monumental fumble. But I think the ending being so bad overshadowed the actual most egregious part of Mass Effect 3's writing. And it's something much, much worse, and something that no amount of Legendary Edition remastering or DLC could fix. And it's the Geth. I have been thinking about how Mass Effect 3 handled the Geth for over a decade now. And when I decided to replay these games for the first time in the form of the Legendary Edition, I knew I needed to make this video, because this monumental mishandling of one of the most interesting parts of Mass Effect has haunted me. It's all I could think about while replaying these games. I've seen people say that the Rannoch missions are some of the best parts of Mass Effect 3, and I don't know why. In fact, I'm here today to prove that the missions on Rannoch are the exact point in the story where Mass Effect 3 took a turn for the absolute worst. Because the worst part of Mass Effect 3 isn't the ending. It's not that stupid kid. It's how the Geth are handled in this game, especially in that final mission on Rannoch. But before I talk about that some more, please allow me to set the stage to justify the reason why Mass Effect 3's handling of the Geth is so egregious. And it's because the way that the Geth were portrayed in both Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 shows so much potential. And it's odd, because they're initially not set up that way in Mass Effect 1. So a quick recap on the overall story of Mass Effect, in case you either did not play the games or just forgot what happened. In Mass Effect, you play as Commander Shepard, a human who discovers an existential alien threat called the Reapers, who want to destroy all life in the galaxy. Across 3 games, you befriend allies, uncover mysteries, and ultimately save the galaxy. A typical space opera. But for this video, I'm going to focus on the Geth, an inorganic race within the series, who were created by another alien race called the Quarians. Long story short, the Quarians tried to kill the Geth said no, the Geth won, and this conflict resulted in the Quarians fleeing their homeworld and becoming galactic nomads. Going back to Mass Effect 1, the Geth are actually the first enemy you face in the game, and they seem to be poised as the main cannon fodder enemy in this game and the entire series, which, yeah, in Mass Effect 1, they absolutely are. However, despite this, Mass Effect 1 still paints a pretty unique picture of the Geth as the story unfolds. You can get more information on the Geth through the Codex, as well as through interacting with characters in the game. Some of the most important and relevant information you receive about the Geth is from Tali. She's the first Quarian you can have a real conversation with in the game, and she's our gateway into the information about the Quarians, the Geth, and their overall conflict. What stands out in Tali's conversation is how she explains, as the Codex does, how the Geth are linked together in a neural network and how they work in concert with nearby other Geth. This means that the more Geth you have together, the smarter they are. On their own, Geth aren't smart. They have a rudimentary process and basically animal intelligence, but when they're together, they get smarter. Tali makes the distinction that the Geth are not a group consciousness, that they aren't a hive mind like the Rachni. Instead, Tali says that each Geth maintains an individual awareness and identity. They're unable to share sensory data or information, but together, they form a neural network that operates basically like a subconscious. I thought that this was such a unique take on intelligence, and I was so excited to learn more about them. Tali also mentions that the Geth have evolved on their own, which sets the stage for them in the future of the series. And yes, Tali is a Quarian, so yes, she does have a bias. But she is probably the best source of information on the Geth in Mass Effect 1 outside of the Codex. In Mass Effect 1, you can also have a conversation with Sovereign, a Reaper, the only other inorganic race that you can interact with in the series. It's interesting to me that even in Mass Effect 1, they're trying to place this dichotomy of being alive or being a machine or being organic or being inorganic. So I do have to give some kudos to the writers of Mass Effect 3 here, that there was some groundwork already in place for the final conflict, and those themes of organic life versus inorganic life. However, I do think that there is a huge lost opportunity here in the way that this theme continues into Mass Effect 3, and that lost opportunity also plays into the Geth's ultimate fate. Mass Effect 1 is the first game in the series, and it needs to set a stage, build a universe, and I think it does so quite well. There is a reason why we stuck around for the sequel and then stuck around for a third installment. It's because the first Mass Effect game was really compelling. So the end of Mass Effect 1, of course, sets the stage for Mass Effect 2. And as you go into Mass Effect 2, your character dies. What a fun hook. What a fun hook that is. I thought this was a great way to do a time skip in a sci-fi setting while keeping the player's perspective in the same space as their characters. Mass Effect 2 is a huge source of information on the Geth. And that main source of information comes in the form of Legion, a Geth companion. Once you get Legion, you get the option of whether or not you want to activate it. And I remember seeing something a long time ago that a lot of people actually sold Legion to Cerberus. But I searched and searched and I could not find the actual stat from BioWare since it would have been published like a decade ago. So if you know what I'm talking about, please let me know, or maybe I'm just imagining it. But either way, my point here is that people did sell Legion to Cerberus, which means they missed out on a ton of information about the Geth. You find Legion in the Reaper IFF mission, and if you do decide to activate it, Legion is usually a player's last recruitable character. Because after you do the Reaper IFF mission, a countdown timer begins for the game's last mission. So alright, full disclosure, I played these games mostly unmodded, barring a few exceptions. I installed some community patches across all 3 games for bug fixes, added Pinnacle Station in Mass Effect 1, and most importantly, and why I mention it now, is that in Mass Effect 2, I used a mod that let me delay the last mission start, so I could get some more time with Legion without sacrificing my crew. And I also used unlimited sprint mods because of course I did. So compared to the other companions, you typically don't get a ton of time with Legion, but you do absolutely get enough time with it for Legion to completely recontextualize the Geth in Mass Effect. In the first interaction that you have with Legion on the ship, Legion makes a point in saying that it isn't an individual.
We are all Geth.
What is the individual in front of me called?
There is no individual. We are Geth.
And the only reason why Legion is called Legion is because EDI suggests a name because your character is so insistent on it having one. Legion is a collection of 1,183 active Geth, shoved together in one mobile unit. As mentioned before, the Geth gain intelligence by being together in close proximity. Legion is unique because the amount of programs within the platform allows it to work outside of the Geth consensus on its own, although you can find it communicating back with the other Geth during the game. Legion gives you a ton of information on the Geth if you talk to it. The Geth kind of remind me of how we all have individual cells in our body that can operate with their own processes and jobs and tasks, but they all come together to form us. But we don't think of ourselves as a collection of cells. We think of ourselves as us. One thing that limits this analogy is the fact that our software and our hardware are explicitly linked, as well as the fact I don't think our cells are ever thinking of themselves as individuals or even capable of thinking of such things, unlike the Geth. But I still think that this is a useful analogy in explaining how the Geth epitomize how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. One Geth on its own isn't much, but a lot of them together is a big deal. I also think it's important to note that at this point in Mass Effect 2, where you're just on the ship, this is where Legion is able to report back to the overall Geth consensus. And this is when Legion has the most access to resources and other Geth and the collective intelligence. It's almost like I might come back to this later on in the video. But carrying on with Mass Effect 2. One of the biggest points this game hammers in is that the Geth you see in Mass Effect 1 are not the entirety of the Geth. Legion talks about how the Geth are essentially split into 2 factions, with the Geth that follow the Reapers being called literal heretics, which is an incredibly loaded word. Legion also states that the Reapers are much like the Geth, in that Reapers have multiple programs within a Reaper ship with one will and many minds. But Legion reaffirms that following the Reapers isn't the right path for the Geth, and that using their technology in any way would severely weaken them. And once again, the main division within the Geth is that the heretics accepted Reaper technology and are following them. This is such a big point that Legion's loyalty mission is focused entirely on this and the choice on whether to destroy or rewrite these heretic programs. I do think it's interesting that Legion defers the decision for this to Shepard, but I think that this is easily explained by the fact that this is a role-playing game, and this is an easy opportunity to give the player some agency in the story. You can also justify it in that Legion doesn't have the ability to contact the rest of the Geth in this mission. So I get it. Legion can operate on its own, but Legion is only 1,000-something Geth, and there are so many more Geth who have different data and who could have helped make this decision if Legion had access to them. And making a big decision like this on its own while not in contact with the broader Geth consensus is by definition not going to be as thought out as making this decision in tandem with every other Geth giving input. Despite the fact that the Geth really respect Commander Shepard, throughout your time in Mass Effect 2, Legion talks about the inefficiencies of organics.
We prefer direct digital transfer. Geth network communication travels at light speed. Human hardware does not support this method. Your analog oral communication is inefficient.
Most importantly, it outright questions individualized sentience.
If this is the individuality you value, we question your judgment.
Geth don't hide information from each other when they're linked, which is why the heretics leaving was such a big deal, because it disconnected them from the rest of the Geth, and then made them evolve down a completely different line. I want to point out that the Geth are not hardware, they're just software. Legion makes a point that this is what makes them so different from other life forms. This also includes other AI in Mass Effect, who are tied to their hardware in the form of their blue boxes. This means that the Geth are inherently going to develop in different ways that aren't constrained by the same limitations of other life forms. So I found it kind of interesting that if you bring Legion onto the Citadel, you get this small snippet of conversation about Legion looking into other hive species.
This is not unlike our stations, far more inefficient. Your organic shells require more space. Information propagation is slow. Many voices speak at once. We do not understand how it functions without consensus. Perhaps study of other hive species will illuminate, beginning extranet search protocols.
This little snippet directly contradicts Tali's words in Mass Effect 1, and this could absolutely just be a one-off of someone writing some side dialogue who interpreted the Geth in a way that made sense to them. But I also think it's entirely possible that throughout so many years of being isolated on their own, the Geth and their pooled processes have made them gravitate more towards wanting to be a hive mind. Legion even says that this prospect was one of the big reasons why the heretics split off to follow the Reapers. And I am not saying the Geth are a hive mind. I want to be very clear on that. I'm saying that the Geth don't value individualism, and this is something they've come to a consensus about over many, many cycles. Legion has multiple conversations about how bad individualism is for the Geth.
To be isolated within a single platform is to be reduced. We see less, comprehend less. It is quieter.
If you exchange data, memories, how do you keep track of which ones are yours? How do you stay you?
There is only we. We were created to share data among ourselves. The difference between Geth is perspective. We are many eyes looking at the same things. One platform will see things another does not, and will make different judgments.
They talk about how many issues being separated from each other has caused. The Geth rejecting individualism and this being stressed so many times throughout all of your interaction with Legion, only for this theme to get entirely undermined in Mass Effect 3 is so disappointing. Mass Effect 3 really fumbled all of this great lore for one of the most interesting species in the series. Mass Effect 3 plunges you into the big galactic war for existence against the Reapers. The Quarians and the Geth are mostly absent in the beginning of the game. You get a couple of messages about them, but otherwise, they're not really around. Later in the game, it's revealed that the Quarians have attacked the Geth in an effort to exterminate them and take back their homeworld. This is what spurs the Geth to work with the Reapers. You're then given a mission to disable a Geth dreadnought. Here is where you'll find Legion in Mass Effect 3. However, if Legion died or was sold to Cerberus, you instead encounter a Geth VI that looks identical to them. It's explained that the Geth are using Legion's platform to broadcast Reaper signals. Which, okay, I didn't realize that Legion's mobile platform was actually just a really cool radio amplifier. But alright. Remember in Mass Effect 2 where Legion says that the Geth don't want to use Reaper technology? Well, they're using it now. And I do understand that in Mass Effect 3 there's a different situation going on with the Quarians attacking the Geth and attacking their megastructure. And they do try to address this when you talk to Legion and question it about that. But I never liked this. When I first played this game all those years ago, I felt some dread in my gut at this conversation. But I was willing to see where this went. Because I guess they did try to offer a plausible reason on why the Geth would just completely 180 their opinions on working with the Reapers. Facing destruction and near certain death is a good enough reason to reevaluate one's positions. But I still think it's odd. The Geth defeated the Quarians before when the Quarians had a home field advantage and the Geth were less evolved. But for now, let's move on. As a side note, I hate that Shepard addresses Legion with a gender once they're on the Normandy. This seems like a ham-fisted setup to help justify what happens later on Rannoch. Tali was right here for all the wrong reasons, but I'm absolutely for it. Right before Rannoch, Legion is conflicted about how the Reapers have upgraded the Geth. The game makes this point about how with the Reaper updates, the Geth are now fully evolved AI. And Legion is really excited about this being an evolution and indicative of life. I hate this. I hate this so much. Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 have already talked extensively about how the Geth have continued to evolve. It is not new. Why is Legion so enraptured with this upgrade? Why is Legion so excited to liken these upgrades as being like the evolution of organic life? The same type of life and evolution that Legion just spent an entire game tearing into? Yippee! Remember how Legion said that the Geth aren't hardware, they're just software? I don't think the writers of Mass Effect 3 understood the fact that the Geth are not their platforms. This is also evidenced at the end of the mission to disable the Geth fighters, where every character, including Legion, is using Geth primes as a proper noun as if it's a big deal. It really isn't. The way that EDI is written in Mass Effect 3 also points to this. Synthetic life in Mass Effect 3 is written in a way that suggests that the writers are either unwilling or unable to engage with the idea that intelligence and self doesn't have to be constrained or defined by a physical body. Artificial intelligences like EDI are normally tied to a bit of quantum hardware called a blue box. An AI is nothing more than bits of code without this hardware. It's kind of like how if you take someone's brain out of their body, you can't just move that brain into another body and have that person exist again. This hardware limitation of traditional AIs has been talked about since the first game. EDI may be projecting into this mech, but she's still on this ship because that's where her blue box is. The fact that the Geth are different from this is such a big deal because it means they aren't limited by hardware the same way that other AI are. Individual Geth are free to move around from hardware to hardware because Geth impose upon hardware. Hardware doesn't impose upon them. This is again part of what makes the Geth so unique in Mass Effect 1 and 2, and why Mass Effect 3's fumbling of this is so disappointing. The narrative positions the Reaper upgrades and the Geth becoming more like fully evolved AI as a positive thing, and this does them such a disservice. So when EDI says something like,
I enjoy the freedom of intelligence without requiring consensus,
it's so silly to me because she's limited in other ways that get outright ignored in this installment. So please keep this in mind as we head into the final mission of this arc, Priority Rannoch, and where it all goes wrong. At the start of this mission, Legion lets you know that it's still carrying remnants of the Reaper code. It says that these code upgrades make them more intelligent and makes them more efficient. This comes into play in the last part of Rannoch, where you have to make the decision on whether or not Legion should upload the Reaper code to the Geth to make the Reaper upgrades permanent. Legion says that uploading this code would mean that the Geth would have free will, would be a true intelligence, and would be alive. What? If you allow Legion to upload that Reaper code, it does so. Then Legion uses I to refer to itself rather than we, before it sacrifices itself to disseminate the code into the Geth consensus. This is awful. Let's go back to the first part of this scene. The Geth technically already have free will. That's part of why the heretics were able to branch off. Yes, the Geth do need to be together in order to have any kind of intelligence. That's a detriment. However, throughout Mass Effect 2, the idea of an individual intelligence had kind of been discarded by the Geth. They didn't want that. What really gets me here is that last part where Legion says the Geth will be alive. Excuse me? By whose metric? Why does the narrative imply that the Geth need to be more like other intelligences and like organics to be valuable? Why is this a good decision for them? It's also worth noting that Legion here is acting on its own. Even if the Reaper code made Legion more intelligent, how exponentially more intelligent did it make Legion? It doesn't matter. Because Legion here is doing its own thing. It's operating on its own without consulting anybody else. The entire idea of the Geth is that they work together in true consensus building. They come together in a direct democracy and it is being overwritten by the tiniest fraction of the Geth. Legion here also refers to itself as I instead of we. The idea that Legion sees itself as Geth and not as an individual is hammered throughout the entirety of Mass Effect 2. And in Mass Effect 2, this isn't presented as a problem. If anything, individualism is presented as a problem to the Geth. So Legion has kept some of the Reaper upgrade code, which means that it may or may not have brew intelligences on its platform. And even if these are just Geth that are working together in tandem with just a bit more intelligence, why is the narrative excited about these 1,000-something Geth coming together and making their own little schism? This is the literal opposite of what the previous games have been trying to hammer in about the Geth, and it is now being presented as a positive outcome. This sucks. If you want the Geth to live, you have to upload the Reaper code. And this introduces a slew of other questions. Have you essentially doomed the Geth to have those same issues that come with individualism, more factions and more fighting? When they say true intelligence, are they referring to the way that other AI in Mass Effect work, with a blue box and being tied to hardware? Have you now introduced a potential resource crisis onto the Geth? Because if they're all acting on their own, then they're all going to want to act in different ways, and that's potentially going to ruin processes and procedures that have been in place for the benefit of the collective, not the individual. The fact is that the Geth were set up as this unique intelligence throughout the series. The Geth aren't like other AI. The Geth aren't like organics. The Geth are their own thing. It would have been so much more interesting if you could instead affirm the Geth as a unique distributed intelligence during the last scene on Rannoch. That instead of uploading this Reaper code, you could affirm that they're worthy of being saved and preserved as they are, as creatures who need each other to exist, who need to be connected, who need to be together. That the Geth are greater than the sum of their parts. Why do we have to make a decision to impose something on the Geth that for cycles and cycles they've rejected and only accepted under duress? Wouldn't rejecting the Reaper code add to the idea of rejecting the Reapers and their influence on the galaxy? That different types of life can coexist once we learn to accept and celebrate those differences? But no. Instead, if you want to save the Geth, you have to impose the Reaper code on them. You have to fundamentally alter their future in a way that they've been actively rejecting for the past 2 games. I've been thinking about this ever since I played these games. I really wish that the Geth were written differently in Mass Effect 3. The Geth were so unique. They made you think about intelligence in a different way, and all of that was thrown out the window on Rannoch. And of course, this is a fictional universe. So why does it matter so much? Well, it matters to me, that's why I've been talking about it, but it also matters because our brains are wired for narrative. Fiction allows us to explore ideas and make sense of the world. Good fiction can make you think about real things in a completely different perspective. So the fact that Mass Effect had this great, unique take on intelligence and squandered it for a more conventional one, it kind of hurts. A sci-fi setting is the perfect place to explore unique ideas, especially when it comes to exploring how we structure societies, our relationship to ourselves and our bodies, how we relate to others, and how we explore the idea of consciousness as a whole. But the setting of Mass Effect 3 after Rannoch emphasizes that Mass Effect needs to define life in narrow terms, emphasizing harsh dichotomies and not considering other nuances. Mass Effect cannot come back from this. A new Mass Effect game has been teased for years, but I have no hope for it. There has been a ton of turnover at BioWare over the years, especially between Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3, which is where I think a lot of these issues came from. I'm certain that during the development of these games, there was some corporate meddling going on, because of course there was. I know I just spent a ton of time critiquing the writing of Mass Effect 3, but I also want to emphasize that writing is hard, and anyone who says otherwise is wrong. Unfortunately, that doesn't change how the Geth were written in Mass Effect 3. And for me, that's the final nail in the coffin for this series. I cannot imagine any future installment in this series as being anything other than mediocre. For me, all of the joy of discovery in Mass Effect, all of its promise, that's all ripped from this series on Rannoch. Thank you so much for watching this video. This is my first video essay, and I'm just glad that I finally talked about this topic since it's been on my mind for a while. If you like this video, please be sure to do all the YouTube things. Like, comment, and subscribe. I have ideas for other things to yap about, But for now, I just wanted to say thank you so much.